Gracious Lord, Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for your Son, your Spirit, your church, for this time together to once again study your word. We give you thanks for all the disciples and apostles, but particularly James, to begin reading his letter today. And we thank you for the wisdom he passes along to us. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
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 All right, so the most surprising thing to me is looking at the top of this, and it says September 1st. It's September 1st. I can't
That's
believe it.
what this Sunday is.
September 1st. August has passed us by. So here we are, moving along. The other thing that's interesting, and this happens sometimes with the lectionary, is that we have gone backwards in the Old Testament, from Joshua to Deuteronomy.
Uh-huh.
But it's almost the same speech. Here are these statutes, do them.
Yeah.
That type of thing. So it's a great reminder. And this is the beginning of Deuteronomy. And it's, again, the words of Moses. Is this one of the ones you have to read, Rich? The Deuteronomy passage?
Is that what you have to read?
Yes, yeah, I read the Old Testament, New Testament, and Epistle.
All right, well, why don't you read Deuteronomy for us this morning?
Okay, surely. Moses said, "So now, Israel, give heed to the statutes and ordinances that I am teaching you to observe, so that you may live to enter and occupy the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, is giving you. You must neither add anything to what I command you, nor take away anything from it, but keep the commandments of the Lord, your God, for which I am charging you. You must observe them diligently. This will show your wisdom and discernment to the peoples, who, when they hear all these statutes, will say, 'Surely this great nation is a wise and discerning people.' For what other great nation has God so near to it as the Lord our God is whenever we call to him? And to what other great nation has statutes and ordinances as just as this entire law that I am setting before you today? But take care and watch yourself closely, so as neither to forget the things that your eyes have seen, nor let them slip from your mind all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children, the word of the Lord."
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is a good admonition, and it lends itself to all the behavior of the Pharisees and points in that direction as we reach to the gospel. The Pharisees, who once again are sort of jumping down Jesus' throat for not eating things that are clean according to the law of Moses. These statutes and ordinances are more than the 10 Commandments. They're the 613, whatever that number is of ordinances that we hear about. You can't add anything or take away anything. Similar to what Jesus said later on, right? You cannot take anything from it, not a jot or a tittle. And this is, part of it is this behavior sets you apart. Part of it is this behavior shows that you're a wise and discerning people. None of it really is talking about faithfulness or righteousness. Often one of the taglines that comes with this: be righteous, be faithful, be pure, all those other kind of things. But take care and watch yourselves closely, so as neither to forget the things that your eyes have seen, nor to let them slip from your mind all the days of your life. When we think of those things which your eyes have seen, I think maybe of, well, I've seen the words of the Bible. I have seen that type of thing. This is a time when not a lot, if anything, had even been written down. So the what you have seen part would be the parting of the Red Sea, or the manna that comes down from heaven, or the cleft of the rock, and all those actions that God has taken in saving them. They have not yet entered the land of milk and honey, which is where we were last week. Not just entered, but having been there for some time when Joshua was giving his speech. So this observe them diligently is important. It's what all preachers sort of say, observe these things. But again, nothing about grace in all of that. So very different. What else do you note in this? What questions do you have? What observations?
I love the part that says, what other great nation has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is whenever we call to him? That is very assuring. Yeah. And it makes me want to heed the statutes and ordinances. They say on his good side. Collins has his hand raised.
Yes, Collins.
Deuteronomy 4 comes in when the Jewish tradition had that they had adopted 412 laws at that particular time. Then Deuteronomy 5, etc., added 413, which was not to desire another's possessions. It's interesting that in 4, the writer is saying, as Moses is saying, skip the addition and subtraction. We're going to just abide by these. And at that point, the number had risen not to the 613, but to the 412. And yet, the Hebrews didn't follow Moses' instructions and went on to add another 201 ordinances, if you will. But as they say in Rich knows in Louisiana, whenever the legislature's in session, no telling what might happen. So I think that it's interesting how the Jewish tradition is like, well, let's make a law about it, an ordinance, Now, if you look at a lot of these ordinances, they weren't specifically what I would call spiritual ordinances, but there was more how to get along and do the right thing, whether it was in agriculture or in a neighborhood or with dealing with land, almost what you might say common sense. However, I think sometimes we tend to focus on, quote, the law rather than the lawgiver. And it's important for us, I believe, to know that Jesus said that he came to fulfill, not to do away with. A lot of folks like to take the New Testament and say, well, all those 613 or the 10, we don't need them anymore. We've got Jesus, we got the cross, he paid the price, it's done. I believe Jesus still said, obey, and I think it's important for us to remember that we should be not only obeying, but we should be passing that lesson on to our children and to our grandchildren.
Yes.
That's right.
But I would also add that, those things that you were calling more mundane or earthly things, like agriculture or whatever else, represents a spiritual relationship too.
Yes.
And that's monks when they're making their bread or making their wine, or when you're just about your duty of washing your dishes. All these things have since God created the world, when we are interacting with the soil, when we're interacting with water, when we're interacting with, you name the list, it's spiritual. It's not meant to be separate or distinct. That, God created this and said it's good, have dominion over the earth, multiply, all those other kind of things. And that's from the beginning, it's a relationship.
Rich probably doesn't want to remind us about the time he came over to the North Shore to go to the Abbey, and he saw one of the monks slicing potatoes, and who was getting ready for the making potato chips. And Rich asked him, "Are you the friar?" He says, "No, I'm the chipmunk.
I'm a chip. Yes.
How do I make the heart?
That's great. That's great. All right, anything else humorous or serious in this passage? All right, excellent. So for the psalm today, Rich, since you've already read, I'm going to give the psalm duties to Ginger and Laura here, and if y'all would read by the whole verse, please.
Okay. You want to start?
Lord, who may dwell at your tabernacle? Who may abide upon your holy hill?
Whoever leads a blameless life and does what is right, who speaks the truth from his heart.
There is no guile upon his tongue. He does no evil to his friend. He does not heap contempt upon his neighbor.
In his sight, the wicked is rejected, but he honors those who fear the Lord.
He has sworn to do no wrong and does not take back his word.
He does not give his money in hope of gain, nor does he take a bribe against the innocent.
Whoever does these things shall never be overthrown.
Thank you. Again, here are some behaviors that may not on the surface look to be spiritual in terms of relationship with God, but the same type of things from Matthew 25, as much as you do to the least of these, you do it to me. So how we lend out our money or not taking bribes, how we keep our word, how we reject the wicked, all those things are part of our spiritual living.
Is wicked referring to a thing or a person? The wicked is rejected. Wicked, a wicked deed or a wicked? Because then it goes on, he honors those who fear the Lord. Are we talking about a person or a doing?
I think of it as more of a behavior.
Okay.
In his sight, the wicked is rejected, the wicked behavior, the
Okay.
wicked activity. That's how I would take it. I don't know for sure.
I don't either. That's why I asked.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that the psalmist starts off with a question, and the question is to the Lord. And there are two key words, I think, in the question, and that is dwell and abide. Those two are key to each one of us. In other words, where are you going to dwell, Ginger? Mary, where will you abide? And the Lord answers the psalmist, basically telling the psalmist to tell us, who is it that's going to dwell in God's tabernacle? Who's going to abide on God's holy hill? And God uses the psalmist to lay out essentially some right living behavior in order to have you blameless to dwell in God's tabernacle, to abide on God's holy hill. And I think it's important for us to remember that this psalm isn't just written for those at that time, but is written for us and for our children and for our grandchildren, so that they may also learn how to dwell with God and how to abide with God. And may you today draw nearer in your dwelling and your abiding.
Very good. I like that.
The other thing, of course, with verse number 2, who leads a blameless life and does what is right? The answer to that is no one. No one is blameless. So in many ways, no one can dwell in the tabernacle or on the holy hill. But that's why they were trying through their behaviors, whether it be 412 or 613, to be blameless. Oh, I've kept that one. 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 And James, in the later part of his letter, which we'll get to in the weeks ahead, talks about that. You may be keeping all the law. You may not have murdered anybody, but if you lied, it's the same as breaking the whole law, not just.
That's why
a part of
the
it.
next line, who speaks the truth from his heart.
And it doesn't mean we shouldn't try to lead a blameless life,
That's right. That's right.
even though it is kind of a hopeless proposition.
That's right. And so with both of these first two things, there's purity, there's blamelessness, there's keeping the law and doing it in a very strict kind of fashion, which is leading us towards what this encounter with Jesus and the Pharisees and some scribes. But we're not there quite yet. So let's move on to James. James is a pretty short book, 5 chapters. You can read it inside of 20 minutes or something like that if you want to, and I encourage you to be able to do that. And James is writing this letter, as it says in the opening part of the letter, to the 12 tribes dispersed throughout the Mediterranean. So by this time, he is still thinking in a Jewish kind of way, Hebrew kind of way. These are the 12 tribes. He doesn't see himself as distinct from Christianity, but he is obviously talking about Christian things. Rich, I see your hand up.
Yes, my question is, tell me about James. Is this a letter by someone named James to somebody else, like Paul to to whoever, as an epistle? Is this like an epistle to someone?
This is an epistle in general. It's like an op-ed in a newspaper. You're sending it out to a whole bunch of people, to whoever cares to read it. It's not to a particular church like in Ephesus or in Corinth or in Jerusalem. And this is understood to be James, the brother of Jesus, who was the leader of the church in Jerusalem. So it's not like there's James and John, but it's not that James. And there's little James, and it's not that. I mean, there are all these other Jameses.
So is this Big James?
This is not Big James either. This is James, the brother of Jesus, who is writing these things.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we don't, interestingly, we don't start at the very beginning. But again, as I was mentioning, when you read it, it says James to the 12 tribes of the diaspora, so they're here, the 12 tribes of Israel who were dispersed throughout the Mediterranean. Collins, could you read this one for us, please?
Yes. James, every generous act of giving with every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. In fulfillment of his own purpose, he gave us birth by the word of truth, so that we would become a kind of first fruits of his creatures. You must understand this, my beloved, let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. For your anger does not produce God's righteousness. Therefore, rid yourself of all sordidness and rank growth of wickedness, and welcome with meekness the implanted word that has the power to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in a mirror. For they look at themselves and, on going away, immediately forget what they were like. But those who look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers, but being not hearers who forget but doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing. If any think they are religious and do not bridle their tongues, but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So again, here's something very interesting. Religion is not the 613 ordinances and statutes. It's something very simple. It's not going to church every Sunday or every day. It's not saying your prayers. It is not giving a certain amount of money, X, Y, or Z. It is to care for orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself unstained by the world. I mean, that's part of what the Ten Commandments are about in a lot of different ways. Is, you know, the world corrupts. The world wants us to be like this list of things at the bottom of the gospel lesson. It takes us towards wickedness or deceit or envy or slander or pride or folly. I mean, that's what we think of the world does, our more base desires and all those kind of things. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I just always have found that interesting that James distills the religious life to those three things, or really two things: caring and not being stained by the world. This, of course, is not the letter that Martin Luther liked so much because it's all by grace, but this idea, be doers of the word, not merely hearers who deceive themselves. It's the doing of things. It's not just the stating of belief and then acting otherwise, sort of as the psalmist was leaning towards. It is about how we, and this is sort of how our mission statement of the church is, to reflect God's love for our faith in action. Faith in action, being doers of the word.
That's really good.
The other thing throughout the whole letter of James is he is very concerned about the tongue and speaking out of turn, speaking falsely. The tongue can create a lot of problems. And so that's where he's saying, my beloved, let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Again, religious behaviors in some ways, faithful behaviors. Let's listen. Let's listen to each other. Let's listen to God. Slow to speak, slow to anger. Because anger does not produce God's righteousness. It produces a whole other slew of things that aren't so healthy for us. And every generous act of giving is from above. Again, sort of like my opening prayer that I say from time to time. God has given us so much.
Yeah.
Sun, spirit, church, earth, water, air, plant life, etc., and etc., and etc. Really everything has come from God, and everything results from that generosity.
Rob, would you enlighten us a little bit on the phrase "Father of Lights"?
I wish I had a little more information, but that particular title, I don't have any particular knowledge of it as it being different from, saying Father Almighty or glorious God. God is responsible for light, capital L, and lights.
Sun
But that's
and
a-
stars.
Yeah, but and sun and stars and that kind of thing. It could be more literal in those ways,
Mhm.
or it might be spiritual. So someone who has access to Google may have to do a better job than I did.
Well, the next part of that sentence talks about there's no variation or shadow due to change. It's a constant light. Constant and consistent.
Mhm.
it certainly is talking about humanity in favorable ways, that we would become a kind of first fruits of his creatures. You know, when you look at and read through Genesis, humanity is actually created last.
Mhm.
After all these things, we are the youngest of all of God's creatures. And nonetheless, sometimes you save the best for last. These first fruits, we're the ones who have this gift of reason. We share in creativity. He coming to save us and do those kind of things. And that first fruits of his creatures raises us up. It's a positive thing. It's not the very negative that says, you know, the spirit is good, but the flesh is weak, but that we are created for good things.
Did you notice Martin has joined us?
Oh, good. Hello, Martin.
Sort of.
Well.
I'm here. I'm
Good. Good.
That's good, Martin.
I wish Allison were here. Maybe this is where, you know, from time to time in a sermon, she will speak to the congregation as my beloved.
Yes.
And maybe, or just beloved.
Yes, it always feels good.
Yes, and this is to understand that we are loved by God. And that love is important. Loved by James, loved by God, and this comes from a place of love.
He got really down to business when he said, rid yourselves of all sordidness and rank growth of wickedness. Ooh, okay.
That sounds heavy.
Covers 400 of those 613 statutes. Strong language.
Rob,
Yes.
I note that it's the Father of lights, plural, which cast another light on that phrase, maybe along the lines of what Ginger's saying, the sun, the moon, and the stars being light that God created, as opposed to a singular light, if you will. The power of the plural.
Yep.
Maybe it's a reference to George Herbert Walker's Bush speech about 1,000 points of light.
Yeah.
George
But I think
Bush.
you do have to, you know, to be, if there are any that are hearers of the word, or they're merely hearers, they deceive themselves. You know, if we just sit in church and listen to the scriptures and listen to the sermon and really don't go out and do anything different, you know, what does self-deception look like? That's a version of self-deception. And we can all be pretty good at self-deception.
Yeah.
Shit, no, what happened?
What else does this stir up for you all? What questions, what observations? Rich?
I thought it's interesting that he doesn't say don't get angry. He just says be slow to anger. So anger apparently is not forbidden. It's just be slow to anger. So I thought that was interesting.
Yes. He does go on to say, for your anger does not produce God's righteousness, I guess, in any form or passion. So when we're feeling ourselves being anger, you know, being aware of it. But, you know, anger shouldn't lead to physical abuse of another person, verbal abuse of another, all those other things that are sordid or wicked or rank. But, you know, anger is an emotion that we all have and get. But it's how we handle it, I think, that also is important. All right, then, we ready to move on to the gospel? Any other? Rich, I see you still have your hand up, but I think that was from what you had just said.
Said you still had your hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
There you go.
All right. And so, then on to the gospel, you can see this is another one of those passages that's chopped up
Yeah,
into little pieces. And so we have to, I don't know why they don't tell us the whole story. I guess it'd just be too long, but a lot of times they choose a gospel passage that's very long. So who knows? So, note that this is happening in Jerusalem, or these scribes and Pharisees had come from Jerusalem. They had gone out to see Jesus. When the Pharisees and some scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. And again, cleanliness is next to godliness, right? As the adage says. But these are part of some of the statutes and ordinances that have a spiritual component that also have a physical well-being. For the Pharisees and all the Jews, do not eat unless they thoroughly wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of their elders, and they do not eat anything from the market unless they wash it. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups, pots, and bronze kettles. So that parenthetical notation is much more of an editorial notation, probably directed towards Gentiles, which this gospel more than likely was directed more to Gentiles, explaining some of these behaviors to Gentiles who had not been brought up in the faith. It'd just be like for us, if we were going to a country where people took their shoes off before they went inside, or they sit on cushions rather than in chairs, or all the different cultural traditions that people have. So the Pharisees and scribes asked Jesus, why do your disciples not live according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands? This is similar to, why don't you keep the Sabbath? Or why are you saying, all these things that the Pharisees, who have been taught to be good, diligent people and follow all of those things. Why aren't you being diligent like our elders? We're all brought up this way. And then, instead of quoting Moses back to them, Jesus quotes Isaiah. Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. So you can see the connection to James, being hearers who deceive themselves. That sometimes when I read these two side by side, I can say, yeah, they had the same mama. They were both taught the same kind of thing in their house. They honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. You're doing it, but as you know, you can do it without your heart being in it. You're doing it just to do it, to say, okay, on the outside, this looks good. In vain do they worship me. So this type of eating, even though it's not in the temple, religious, whatever else, it becomes a form of worship, like we've been talking about from the beginning with Deuteronomy. How we care for the soil, the water, the air, all of these things is actually a form of worship. How we don't deceive our other people, loan them money, bribery money, is a form of worship. All those things are in the realm of our relationship with God and neighbor. They teach human precepts as doctrines. Collins, that sort of goes to your point. Okay, where do these 201 things come from? These people start making up other things along the way that seem to be good, and we'll just don't know if it happened this way, but I'm sure Moses must have said this, so we're gonna say this, and it'll be by extension what's going on. And then, the more thorough condemnation, you abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition. This is where, in some ways, when Jesus says love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, and these two hang all the law and the prophets, if that's the spirit of these commandments. Then he called the crowd again and said to them, so he's speaking to the scribes and Pharisees, then he is speaking to the crowd. Listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile. And again, in other words, make spiritually unclean. This isn't talking, I think, about physical health, because we know that plenty of things go into the body that disrupt our physical health, one way or the other. Nothing in here is being said about shellfish or pork or any of that stuff yet, but this is what also they may be referring to, some of these other ordinances. But the things that come out are what defile. And he's not talking about our regular GI process here. What come out of us from the human heart are evil intentions, fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, and folly. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. So we are soiled and sullied from the inside out.
Yep.
When you think of movies and books and things like that, all of these evil characters like the Emperor from the Star Wars series who's disfigured in his face. Or I remember from teaching English, the Scarlet Letter, there's a priest by the name of Chillingworth. And he is, he gets more and more wicked looking as he grows older. And there are umpteen things. It's the same kind of thing.
His internal secret sin.
That's right. That's right. And yes, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly, all these things sully our dispositions, so to speak. These things come within, and they are what defile a person. So is Jesus then rewriting the law? Or is he just explaining it in another way?
I think he's explaining it. And also it's words that come out of the mouth that can be bad.
Right. That's where I think deceit can be. Pride comes out of the mouth, folly,
Slander.
slander.
Yeah.
It says they come from within and they defile a person, thinking that Chillingworth, he was being eaten from the inside because of these, he was keeping all of this inside. And so, I mean, it's bad for it to all come out too, but maybe we shouldn't have any of those ever.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's right. So what observations, what questions do you have about this one?
I'm still gonna wash my hands before I eat.
Yeah. Mhm.
But it has nothing to do with good common sense, things we taught our children.
Mhm.
I was just thinking that as a kid, if I'd have known this passage, how many times I might have used it. My mother said when she said, "Go wash your hands." I mean, all the way up to your elbows.
When you think of so many of the stories of the Old Testament and plenty of stories in the New Testament, Cain and Abel, David and Bathsheba, any number of other kings of Israel, they involved these sins.
Yeah,
When you think about Judas, when you think about Peter, even, when Jesus was chastising folks, saying, "Get behind me, Satan," or whatever else, it's because of these things. Peter's pride.
I find it interesting that the last one mentioned is folly.
Mhm.
That doesn't seem quite as bad as the rest of them, but
Right.
just being foolish.
I remember a long time ago, I think I did dissect that word somehow or another. And it had more to do than foolishness, but I forget what it is.
Martin has his hand up.
Hey, Martin.
Hey, so I'm reminded of a book a few years ago that a fellow had investigated all these deposed dictators, like 78 of them in the previous century. And they all admitted to one failing, and only one. And that is they had simply not loved, their people had simply not loved them enough. That was their failing, that they had not inspired love and affection from their people. I mean, Idi Amin and Papa Doc and all of this whole array of horrible folks. So my question is this: when this defilement occurs, does it really register with the person who's doing this, or what we would call theft might be for that person justified taking? And you just go down the list where they have so damaged their own capacity to discern that they think it's acceptable, and that it might even be godly. I mean, we can think of a lot of preachers that are out there abusing their flock, right? I don't know in the end if it's sort of 60-40 where you do something, well, maybe that could have been done better. Or does it need to be 100% not wicked, 100% not envious, 100% not deceitful? To me, there's so much gray. I would that the world were absolutely black and white and there were all these stop signs rather than yield signs. I don't know what to make of it exactly, but that's when I hear it or read it, it's hard to know. Is it God that's ultimately judging, or is it we who are judging ourselves and consequently discerning that we shouldn't do those things and that we're on a learning curve somehow? Or we suffer the consequences and eventually we'll get it. Well, those deposed dictators never got it. They had simply loved their people too much. That was their problem.
Right, and I would agree that what you're sort of saying, the self-deception there, the denial from folks like that, who were involved often in in a lot of murder or a lot of stealing, et cetera, down the line, deceit, that there were still, probably narcissists who just don't get it. And that's where some discernment on our part is, what part of this action that we're doing might be envious? What part of this action that we might be involved in is really about our pride? What part of this, it may not be murder, like my killing somebody with a knife, but how by extension has some action that I have taken resulted in the death of somebody else? Taking a life. And so all those things, I think, make us think about behaviors, individual behaviors, which I think this is addressing, but also corporate behaviors.
James reminded us that it's like people who look in the mirror and see themselves and then go on and immediately forget what they were like. And
Right.
not owning up to these problems.
Right.
Where does this fit at all with the seven deadly sins or the Ten Commandments? I mean, there are 12 of these categories, I think. Is there a name for these 12?
Well, I know in the church there have been major and minor sins in those kind of ways. They're all sort of tied together. You know, theft is part of the Ten Commandments. Adultery is, envy to the sense of do not covet. So they're obviously murder. I mean, all those things they're part and parcel of that. But it's just part of that whole grouping.
I find folly a little different than the other 12. Folly is if you will, a temptation to go down the path of folly that initially is how do I want to say, a quick and easy, an immediate, pleasurable way, but will ultimately lead to spiritual death. So I think it was worthy to add the 12th on there, Martin. And Laura, folly might not necessarily be included in the Ten Commandments, but Jesus wanted to point out one of the risks of succumbing to the easy temptation to take the path of folly, which is a different type of enticement, if you will, than the other 11.
Folly is almost, it seems to me, getting out of your skin and finding entertainment by either being a voyeur or being silly or kind of refusing to accept your circumstance and live through that. Instead, you divert and play and run away. You waste your time.
Right. There was a father who counseled his children, truly counseled his children, saying, any grade higher than a C isn't worth it. Basically saying, just, be in school, as long as you're making C's, it's okay. I'm not looking for you to put yourself into your studies or really learn this or whatever else. And then that's sort of, that time isn't important. And so that's sort of what we're talking about is folly. And I like how you put it too, Martin, is wasting time. God has given us this wonderful time. And what are we doing? It's interesting. Linda and I for humor sometimes watch old episodes of Seinfeld. And last night, George Costanza was joining us. He was in this book club. And when he was supposed to read the book Breakfast at Tiffany's, which is only 90 pages, and he couldn't bring himself to do it. He could read Mad Magazine. He was happy to read Mad Magazine, but he just couldn't pick up the book. And so that's sort of folly. Okay, you're just wasting your time. You're just mindlessly watching TV, or you're just whatever else, and all those things that we do. And it's like, why did I choose to do this instead of that? So maybe folly is about good decisions, good use of time.
Too many parents tell their kids the opposite of what you said.
Mm-hmm.
Any grade below a C is not acceptable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then that puts so much pressure on kids. And the teachers.
Yeah. Well, and maybe to that point, even this list puts pressure on us. You know, to live this kind of way without wickedness, without deceit. And what are the quote unquote consequences? And do we feel like, well, if I break one of the 613, I've broken them all, so why should I even try? Why should I even try? But that certainly isn't the message of Christ.
That's lazy.
I suspect everybody remembers Jimmy Carter's comment that I've sinned in my heart when he's, I've committed adultery in my heart. It's very interesting that he was so willing to publicly display what this is talking about. And he was ridiculed to some extent.
And that's the source of this. It is the human heart. It's not the mind. It's not, quote unquote, the loins when it comes to adultery and fornication. It's the human heart. Not as the organ that pumps the blood, but as the source of our desires.
Mm-hmm.
When Jesus says you can't serve God and wealth, or where your heart is, there your treasure will be also. I mean, he talks about the heart in lots of ways.
That's why he wants our heart, so it won't let it go to waste.
That's right. All right, anything else for us today? Great, excellent. Well, thank you for your time, your comments, and let's just be mindful of our heart health,
All right.
spiritually speaking.
And Rich, you do a good job on Sunday with your readings.
That's right.
We'll be thinking of it.
I'll do my very best.
I'm sure you will.
I'll pass your regards on to Fred.
Please do.
Fred
Please do. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks
Thanks be to God.